Welcome to Lynn Cullen Live. Talk radio without the static. Email your questions and comments to lynncullenshow@gmail.com. And now your host, Lynn Cullen.
Hey there, and a good morning at you. I can't believe it. I've done it again. Whoa. Guys, this is looking like it is a possibility that I'm going to be able to pull this off. And I'm even learning how to maybe take calls again. So all good until, of course, something glitches, and then we're in big trouble. Anyway, welcome to the program. It is the last day. No, it's not. It's the 28th, right? Is there one more day in February because this is a leap year? Yeah. I never understood that. And when did they figure that out? I mean, when did somebody say, and who said it? And when did they agree to it? That we're gonna, every 4 years, add a day to this second month here, and that'll keep us on track. I mean, how? See, I don't have a clue. I'm sure I read that someplace, but it didn't stick. Well, okay, big topics today, I guess, as is the case in this time in American history. We've got the Michigan primary. We've got the potential shutdown of the federal government, which we have every other week now because Republicans are in charge. And there's, quite a bit that I maybe want to talk about in regard to that. But you know what I forgot to talk about earlier in the week? Something that struck me at the end of last week when the New York Attorney General, Letitia James, won the case against Wayne LaPierre and the NRA. And I thought, my God, this woman, this is a giant killer. This is a totally fearless defender of the truth and law. And her fearlessness is obvious because we know that her life, I'm sure, is under constant threat. And she doesn't miss. She's really astonishing. To me, she's woman of the year. She's woman of the decade. She's astonishing. Letitia James. Remember that name. It's a consequential name in American history. I think it was it Rubin in the Post today? That's how I got reminded of Letitia, that wrote a just glowing piece about her and contrasted her approach to being a chief prosecutor in a position to bring malefactors to justice. Contrasted her to someone holding an even bigger position, same position, but larger, and that is Merrick Garland, the Attorney General of the United States. She's merely the Attorney General of the state of New York. But as we know, Merrick Garland has been timid, careful, to the point of fearful of appearing to politicize. Going after Trump would look like, because never had a former president been gone after by the Justice Department, and it wouldn't look right, not to mention that the Republicans would go berserk But Reuben so beautifully said this, contrasting those two approaches. Letitia James' approach being, hey man, if you break the law, if you screw my constituents, the taxpayers of New York, I'm coming for you. That's my job. As opposed to Merrick Garland, who's like, hey, if you break the law, very clearly break the law, I'm going to sit here for a year or two contemplating whether or not I should come after you because, oh God, this could happen, that could happen, and it's never been done, and blah, blah, blah. And Reuben said this about that. Letitia James understands that shying away from litigation for fear of enraging the right is itself political. That's a brilliant observation. Merrick Garland says, I don't want to appear political by going after Trump. He never said it, but we know that's what he's thinking and what he thought for months and months and months of dilly-dallying, which is now why we see the time crunch getting this done, getting him convicted before the election. By not bringing charges, Garland was being political. It was politics that was behind his non-decision, his dithering. So that this is something that clearly she doesn't have a problem with. She understands that if you dither, if you get cold feet going after somebody in power in a political position for fear that the yahoos on the right will get their shorts in a twist, which they do on a daily basis anyway, whether something has happened or not, that in itself, that timidity, is political. And then Reuben said this, frankly, being more concerned with the appearance of neutrality, Merrick Garland, than in dogged pursuit of wrongdoers undermines the rule of law. I don't recall if she even necessarily mentioned Merrick Garland in that, but it's clear, I'm sure she must have, that who she's talking about there. Yeah. So raise a glass to Letitia James and pray for her if that's your thing. Pray for her. But she is something. Okay, I had to get that off my plate. You know, the reporting today, the hand wringing, the White House convo yesterday with all the big guys, McConnell and the president and the vice president and the speaker of the House and the majority leader and the minority leader and blah, 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 all trying to get this Christian nationalist nitwit House Speaker to do the right thing. To do the right thing. A simple thing. Fund the effing government. Have the courage to stand up to the obstreperous fascists Even, God forbid, it might cost you your position. Do you know? I mean, one does lose track, but these jerks, that'd be the Trump party, have brought our government to the brink of a shutdown 3 times just in the last 6 months. This is their idea of governance because they get nothing else done. They just throw wrenches in the works. And it's their intent to slow down and or completely prevent government from functioning. So they can then go to their credulous voters and say, look, they haven't done this, they haven't done that. Never mind that they offered us everything we've ever asked for in a border security bill. And we, of course, turned it down because our dear leader said we had to. God. So here we are again. I mean, these stories, of course, started up weeks ago. And I, like I'm sure you turn a deaf ear to it. You don't bother wasting your time reading it because it's one of those been here before. Been here before. I mean, we got to do this stupid dance again. So, yeah. And what they do, of course, is in the House, these neo-fascists load up these bills that are meant to fund the government. They load them up with all kinds of crap that they know have no chance of passage. So they make the bills unpassable. Impossible. Impassable even if most Republicans in the Senate, for instance, would not vote for this crap. I hesitate to say that because I'm not comfortable pulling any members of this Trump party away and suggesting that they are somehow less culpable for where we are. So one of the reasons the government now is on the precipice yet again is because in these bills that have nothing to do with this stuff, the Republicans have put things to restrict abortion medicines. Listen to this one. They have a measure to restrict the Department of Veterans Affairs from red flagging veterans in their care who they know are mentally incompetent. And they're doing that now, the Veterans Affairs Office, in an effort to keep veterans with mental issues from being able to pass a background check in buying a gun. And so the Republicans, always so helpful to make things better, to make sure more innocent people get slaughtered, more children get killed in their classrooms, more lives lost, families destroyed. They will hold up our entire government because the VA is trying to use the few gun restrictions we have to keep veterans from getting access to guns they should not have. Yeah, you got to love these Republicans. And again, you got to wonder who the hell votes for these people? I know these angry white men and their women. The other thing that Republicans are finding just a bridge too far is that some of these bills include providing nutrition assistance, that would be food, to low income families and infants and their moms. Isn't it amazing when you see what Republicans say no to and what Republicans say yes to? I'm no big fan of Chuck Schumer, but he said it right upon leaving the White House conference, and he said, these hard right chaos agents, that's what he called them, and that's what they are. He went on to say that they don't represent a majority of Republicans in the Senate, and that's why I sort of agree with that, but I'm not quite sure. And even then, it would be a slim difference between Republicans in the Senate who do or do not aid and abet. When push comes to shove, they aid and abet. So in 2 days, what's today? Wednesday. In 2 days or so, at midnight, funding for all kinds of stuff will disappear. Or not. Depends on, I don't know what, chaos agents. Depends on any modicum of honor in the Speaker of the House, the Christian nationalist Mike Johnson, in over his mucked up head. So there's all that. And I realize now why I didn't bring that subject up until today, or I wasn't even going to do it today. I was going to wait until tomorrow because we repeat ourselves. Okay, so Michigan primary. No big surprise. No big surprises here. Haley lost. Trump won. Biden won. Anyone who's thinking it's going to be something different is, I don't know, whatever it is you're smoking, I want it. But the uncommitted vote in the Michigan primary does bear some note and concern. Although I suspect not a lot, but again, who the hell knows? The best thing that I read about its import is by Nate Cohn, who I think is the go-to guy for this kind of stuff. He's a political analyst, and as a political analyst, if you do keep track, sort of like a weather guy, he gets it wrong a lot, but he also, I appreciate his historical view, his wider view than my more hysterical micro view. And what he tells us is that yesterday in Michigan 1 in 8 Democrats chose uncommitted. And in some Arab American districts, that number was as high as 3 out of every 4 Democrats, which is a eye-popping number, did not vote for Biden. And as we understand, this is their attempt to say, we are here, our voices count, our votes count. The big question is, what will those voters do in a general election? It's an entirely different animal and a much more consequential one, of course. But having that, 1 in 8 Democrats, which is the number, vote uncommitted in the Michigan primary is no big deal, because they always have this option. They have always had it. And I'm sure you've heard that when Barack Obama ran in 2012, 11% of Democratic voters in Michigan voted uncommitted instead of for Barack, which is not that far from what happened last night. I guess last night the number is 13%, right? A caveat there is that was a much smaller turnout, so it didn't represent, in Barack's case, as many votes. But here's what Cohn says. But having 3 and 4 primary voters in Arab American communities do this is an eye-popping figure and a powerful indication that the war in Gaza poses serious political risks to Biden. Now, he then goes on to try to parse how serious. And here is where, again, this is like tea leaf reading, right? It's maybe you do as well to, again, slaughter a chicken, take its gizzard out, and try to see what the gizzard's telling you. But a vote for uncommitted is a clear and serious protest and an effort to be heard by Biden and the Democrats, but it is not a vote for Donald Trump. And that is what you got to keep in mind. So what we don't know is how many of those non-committed votes will either sit it out or vote for Trump. I mean, a vote for Trump by these Arab Americans would be the most absurd, cutting off your nose to spite your face vote I can conceive of. And protest votes like this are, historically, if you look back, they're hard to interpret when they happen in a primary. Yes, some of these voters are saying we're going to defect from you in the general. Others are saying, I don't really know if I'm going to show up. And a lot of protest votes like these have resulted from foreign policy. They're always saying Americans don't care about foreign policy. It's the economy, stupid. No, when it comes to protest votes, which can change the outcome of an election, whether it be voting for a third party or sitting on your hands, foreign policy issues are often the drivers. If you look and and if you throw ethnicity into it, history teaches us that it is something to be taken seriously. I mean, even today, generations after Cubans fled Fidel Castro for Florida, they have remained in the Republican camp because the Republicans were seen as more fervently anti-communist. Now, I have to say that if those Cuban Americans are paying any attention now, or the grandchildren and great-grandchildren of the Cuban emigres are, they will know that the Republicans now are in fact sitting in the laps of the Russian autocrats. Vietnamese Americans, ladies and gentlemen, generally vote Republican, even as other Asian Americans tend to vote Democrat. But it's the same thing. It has to do with a sense of their history and how they feel about the Democrats and the Republicans at the time their lives were upended. And these things can have a stubbornness because families, generation after generation after generation, often vote in the same way. And just dropping the history lesson back even further, and you may not know this, but at the outbreak of World War II, German Americans, Italian Americans, and Irish Americans swung hugely to the Republican Party, to a more isolationist Republican Party, because if you think about it, Germans didn't want making war on Germany. Italians didn't want to make war on Italy, and the Irish didn't want to be on the same side as the English. Simple as that. And these things to this day have staying power. The reality is that German Catholic counties in the Midwest that routinely voted Democrat up until World War II never did so again. They went Republican because they didn't want to make war on their country, even though they're Americans now, didn't want to make war on Germany. And they have never returned, German Catholics in the Midwest have never returned to the Democratic fold. Excuse me. After 9/11, Arab and Muslim Americans swung toward Democrats, especially after the Bush administration invaded Iraq. And that was even true in Michigan, in the Arab American quarters of Michigan. They voted for John Kerry against Bush. And the thing that Cohn says here that scares me is he says you have to remember that Arab Americans are not a liberal voting group. They are not. And you could say, what? I thought they were like, aren't they progressive? No, they are not progressive. As a group, they come from extremely conservative patriarchal, fundamentalist often countries. So they often feel more comfortable with Republican policies. And the only reason the Republicans are losing them or have in the recent past is because of their racism and their bigotry against Muslims and their now Christian nationalism. And then let me just read this, because I mean, this Michigan thing had me extremely nervous, and I must say I'm still a bit nervous. He says, given the more conservative inclinations of Arab and Muslim voters in America, one could imagine them lurching toward Trump. But again, I find that so cutting off your nose to spite your face. I mean, Trump's the one who says he already has a plan not to let another Muslim into the country. How could a Muslim vote for Trump? Don't mean to scream at you. But Cohn says this. And here's another thing to bear in mind. These voters, these Arab American voters, are a small share of the electorate. And even if they make a pretty big and decisive swing away from Biden and the Democrats, it largely, this guy believes, would not have a huge impact. And then he tells us this, and I find this mind-blowing, but it helps me sleep at night. He says, imagine for a moment that in the last election, okay, it was Biden v. Trump, in case you'd forgotten. Imagine if Biden had lost every single voter in the 3 Michigan townships where Arab Americans make up at least 30% of the population. So he lost every single one of those voters in Dearborn, in Dearborn Heights, in Hamtramck. He still, Biden, would have won Michigan. And he still would have won it by more than he did Wisconsin or Arizona or Georgia. Arab American voters make up about 2% of Michigan's population. And probably, I guess he doesn't know, an even smaller percentage of the American population. And we're not even talking voters. So it could be even fewer of them are voters. I was reading this and starting to feel better, to say the least. But then he had to end with this, and I give it to you. Because the country. Oh, shut the F up, unknown caller. Scam likely. I think I won't answer. He says this, because the country is so narrowly divided, every vote counts. And right now, Biden appears to need every vote he can get. If Arab American and Muslim voters swing by 30 points toward Trump, as has been suggested in some polls in Michigan, that could cost Biden a percentage point in a critical battleground state where he is now trailing in the polls. If the race were close enough, it's possible those voters could decide the 2024 election. But understand, he says that after he tells us that Biden could have lost every single one of those voters in those 3 heavily Arab American townships in Michigan and still have won. So I don't know if that last paragraph is just what media are forever doing, which is always wanting to leave us scared with our stomachs roiling. It could be that. But I thought that was the best takeaway, and I read a lot of them. And I also want to again reiterate that um, they don't know, we don't know. It is politically a long time between now and the election. And we can't, I'm sure, even begin to imagine what lies between now and then. Oh, brother. Okay. Why do I feel like I have a paucity of stuff here? Forgive me again. This is where I'm just don't have my I'm not logistically together anymore. Okay, I have covered the three big things I had intended to cover. I was just checking. Oh, I can't believe I watched was it a 3.5 hour movie? Good God in heaven. I think it made whatever that Scorsese movie is now, The Flowers of the Lost Moon. Seemed short. And of course, it was another Scorsese movie. I had no idea when I clicked on it that it was 3.5 hours long, but I did get into it because, like many Scorsese movies, I mean, it was good. It was called The Irishman, and it was essentially about the death of Jimmy Hoffa, uh, and I thought it was just really, really, really good. But Robert De Niro had the lead. He played the Irishman. Scorsese, obviously, it's fascinating how he uses the same actors. So here's a much younger De Niro, and then he had Al Pacino as well playing Hoffa. So um, if you have 3.5 hours with nothing to do, you could watch. But having just watched De Niro inhabit this role of a assassin, of a killer, I mean, that was his job. He took people out. And yet, because De Niro is such an amazing actor, this character he plays has depth and is an identifiable fellow human. And one feels for him, not always, but at times. And that is great acting. And I think De Niro, who so often has played the villain, the bad guy, he has a real appreciation because he is such a good actor that they are complex, that humans are complex. And so it was so odd that after watching that, I found myself looking through God knows what, probably social media. I'm always looking because I'm looking for fodder for this. But I came upon a uh, speech, and I don't have the whole thing here. I have very little that apparently De Niro recently gave. De Niro, the man, not as a character, uh, the actor himself gave a speech, and he talked about Donald Trump. And I found his words particularly fascinating, given how I had just watched this man inhabit uh, uh, a, the role of a man who killed and killed and killed and killed. And here's part of what De Niro said the other day. I've spent a lot of time studying bad men. I've examined their characteristics, their mannerisms, the utter banality of their cruelty. Yet there's something different about Donald Trump. When I look at him, I don't see a bad man, truly. I see an evil one. Now, I find that fascinating because I'm sure De Niro is being honest in that regard. A guy who has found humanity uh, in so many truly bad men and having to inhabit that, live it, uh, that he, looking at the character that is Donald Trump, doesn't see a human that he can identify with. Because he doesn't see a bad man, he sees an evil man. And De Niro goes on and says, over the years, I've met gangsters here and there. Trump tries to be one, but he can't quite pull it off. You know, there's such a thing as honor among thieves. Yeah, even criminals usually have a sense of right and wrong. Donald Trump does not. I think I've lost part of the story. He goes on to say that bad guys, gangsters, have a sense of right and wrong, and they even have a moral code. It might be warped, but they have one that they adhere to, and that's where that idea of honor among thieves comes from. They perceive something larger than themselves. And he says Donald Trump does not. He's a wannabe tough guy with no morals, no ethics, no sense of right or wrong, no regard for anyone but himself, not the people he was supposed to lead, not the people he was supposed to protect, not the people he does business with, not the people who follow him blindly and loyally, not even the people who consider themselves his friends. He has contempt for all of them. Now, I got to tell you, I've obviously ranted a lot about Donald Trump and talked in the same vein as De Niro is here. But I must say, boy, coming from him and his understanding of the moral codes of bad men and honor among thieves and the complexity of humans, that he sees not one whit of humanity in Donald Trump. That carries weight with me, and I think is really beautifully written. the New York Times did have a long piece the other day. I forgot. I was going to mention it yesterday, didn't, and it was about a woman in, I think, Dearborn, who Farmington Hills, Michigan, who was going to vote uncommitted, just dropping back to where we'd been, and uh, and she says she is going to not vote in November. So she says, the Times piece says, she knows the stakes. She loathes Donald Trump, but she says she won't back Biden in November. And I just want to say, I don't, I, you know, I, why is it that every election we have to go revisit the reality of we live in a two-party system? You got two choices. Granted, the folks in Michigan had four. On the Democratic side, they had Biden, they had uncommitted, they had Marianne Williamson, who has since dropped out. I can't imagine why. And they have this other creep, this, I'm blanking on his name, the congressman from Minnesota, who polled even fewer votes than, uh, than the aforementioned Williamson. How many times do we have to tell people, however angry they are, however betrayed they feel, that here's the deal, okay? If you can like take your emotions and put them aside for a second, which is obviously impossible, um, you have two choices. Well, granted, you have three. You can sit it out. Yes, you can. You can sit it out. But you live in this democracy, this faltering democracy. And you know it's a democracy because you are given a vote. That is your power. And to throw it away by sitting on your hands because the two people, one of whom will be the president of this country, don't appeal to you is to me insane, especially now, given that we know that one represents the end of American democracy. Anyone who says they won't vote for Biden because fill in the blank, I don't care, Gaza, this, that, or the other, is being petulant, childishly petulant. It's not the way the system is set up. And this kind of petulance has often cost this country hugely. This kind of petulance, I believe, cost Al Gore the presidency. I don't know how good a president Al Gore would have been, but I'll tell you this much. He would not have gotten us into a war in Iraq with all of the dominoes that came after it. He would not have allowed. Our history would be completely different. And to think that it's petulance for not having a perfect candidate that puts America in on a different road in our history and has over and over again. And to think that in this election, 2024 that anyone who valued living in even a semblance of a democracy would sit it out or vote for a man who is clearly telling us he wants a Christian, autocratic, undemocratic system is, to me, well, frankly, traitorous. Traitorous. Somebody on chat saying if I were Muslim, I wouldn't vote for Trump or Biden. Fine, fine. Well, you ain't Muslim. I don't know who you're voting for. But again, I say it is lots of things we've learned are not binary. Unfortunately, American national politics is binary. You have Donald Trump or you have Joe Biden. And if you think there's not a dime's worth of difference between them, I give you the Supreme Court, the corrupted Supreme Court, that all of the idiots, God damn it, who voted for, that was God damn it to me, who voted for Trump and made him the president of the United States, I don't think I can ever forgive. I cannot forgive what they have done. And that anyone would do it again makes them a traitor, in my view. A traitor against democracy and the imperfect one America has. You know, I have been politically involved much of my life. I've been fascinated by politics. I have marched, I've even been tear gassed once, not a pleasant experience. I have shouted and screamed and hated whoever it was or whatever it was we were protesting. And I am here to say that I've done my final march long ago because there is, and I've said this, there's a mob like thing that goes on in it where you lose your individuality, which for me is a precious thing. I don't like groupthink. I don't like the sort of out of control, over the top verbiage. I think I told you that I could never, during the anti Vietnam War marches, I couldn't get myself to chant one of the chants because I thought it unfair, because I knew I had a sense of Lyndon Johnson as just extraordinarily complicated man, a wondrously tragic figure. I still do. And even when I was so opposed to what he was doing in Vietnam, I could not chant, hey, hey, LBJ, how many kids have you killed today? It just seemed too easy. It's easy to scream things at people. It's much harder to be in a position where you actually have to do something. I saw that what's his name, Seinfeld, was leaving. Was it 92nd? Is it 92nd Street Y or 93rd Street Y? Just 92nd Street Y in New York the other day, and it was a Jewish thing that was being held there, and he walked out into a bunch of these screaming, supposedly pro-Palestinian people. And he was called, this is Jerry Seinfeld, okay? He was called, a person who was accused of genocide. He was called Nazi scum. And I just want to say that the scum who do that kind of mindless name calling a Jew Nazi scum, when what has he done? I'm not aware of Jerry Seinfeld killing anybody. He kills he kills you with laughter sometimes. I'm sick of it. And it is so now over the top in this country. So I'm done. I will not be part of any chanting crowd anymore. They all make my skin crawl. One step away from being part of a mob. And I'll tell you something else. And I've said this before. When I was part of those well-intentioned mobs, there is a feeling of such self-righteousness that you bathe in. Boy, do you feel like a wondrous being. Boy, do you feel like I am saving the world. I am speaking truth to power. I am amazing. It's infectious. And yet you lose your own agency, your sense of who you are. Do you really believe everything all these people are saying? I often did not. I didn't always have the courage to walk away. I once did. I was 19 and I went to a Students for Democratic, what was it, SDS, Students for a Democratic Society meeting at Northwestern University, and I sat there, fervent, ready to be part of the army. And then some guy stood up and said that unless I was willing to see my parents as the enemy, I was not ready. And I, at the time, had a very prickly relationship with my parents. I barely spoke to them. But I knew they weren't the enemy, and I knew they weren't evil, as he seemed to suggest. And I knew that a blanket statement like that was the biggest bunch of crap I'd ever heard. And it's the one time I had the courage to get up and walk out. All of these people screaming in the streets now. I hope some of them, in quiet moments, reflect and think. It's sort of like, it's not much different than what we hear about people at the Trump rallies. What keeps them there is this sense of belonging to something powerful. And it's something very human wanting that. But if you get that feeling by screaming at a Jewish comedian that he's Nazi scum, well, methinks you should rethink where you are. All right, guys, that's it for me. I done did it again. Tomorrow, I'll do it again because I don't know any better. It's just what I do. Okay? So, you have a good one.
Lynn Cullen Live, Monday through Thursday from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. and archived at pghcitypaper.com. The opinions expressed on Lynn Cullen Live are those of the host and do not necessarily reflect the viewpoints of Pittsburgh City Paper or its advertisers.